Hey everyone, we have hit the 4 week mark of remote learning. 1 month, pretty crazy to think about. As always, I hope you guys are doing well. I hope everyone's safe, healthy, family's doing well, all that jazz. It's been an adjustment for sure for us here at the Thorpe household, but things are good. This week, 4th week, we are going to be talking about the two topics of emotion and personality. Emotion is quite short, only two videos, both of which are under 10 slides total, so pretty short overall. And personality is a little bit longer, but not terribly difficult to go through. So anyway, go ahead and jump right into this. Emotion. The first two are the two videos. This first one's on the how we experience emotional episodes as human beings, our expression of emotion, and then some theories about how we process emotions in regards to our thinking and behavior. And then the the second video is focused on um, types of emotions and things of that nature. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. So in terms of the biological component when it comes to emotion, if you remember back in Unit 2 when we talked about the brain and how and the parts of the brain that deal with emotion. Remember, if we talked about the limbic system being the part of the brain that uses or that emotion is not only processed but also it kind of originates in our thoughts. Uh, and that's why we can that's why emotion can be tied to things like memories and um, uh, uh, bodily expressions, and in some cases bodily functions like hunger, thirst, sex, things like that. So um, again, the limbic system is where emotion is processed in the brain. And then if you remember with the autonomic nervous system, which, remember, autonomic sounds like automatic. Autonomic was the fight or flight response. Usually, emotional responses are tied to things like uh, fight or flight responses, where we are scared suddenly or faced with, um, in some cases, a survival instinct or just a really stressful event. There are emotional responses. Stress is considered an emotion as well. Um, So any stressful situation is going to have a biological component to it as well. Basically, what this slide is saying is that emotion is not just how we feel, it also is a biological component that is processed in our brain as we experience an emotional event. Um, Now, this slide is a little outdated, not just the information with the polygraph testing, but also the Chuck Norris meme. Chuck Norris jokes aren't funny anymore. I recognize that, and I need to update my PowerPoints, and I apologize. But polygraph testing is basically a lie detector test, and sorry, while lie detector tests are good at detecting emotional responses to questions and answers and things of that nature, the kind of the autonomic processes that happen in the body as we think, process, and then answer questions. Um, Polygraphs are not reliable in regards to actually figuring out if someone's lying, and I'll explain more about that in just a minute. But if you know what a polygraph is, if you've ever seen it depicted on TV or in movies, or basically you are hooked up to a machine that measures a bunch of different things. It measures heart rate, it measures skin temperature, it measures brain activity, it measures breathing rate, heart. I think I already said heart rate, but basically the physiological stuff that is going on in the body, and you so. Oh, and also the skin response. So whether you start sweating more or things of that nature. So basically, what polygraphs do is you're hooked up to you're put all these little sensors and things are put on your fingertips and your temple and things like that to measure brain activity, and basically you are asked a bunch of baseline questions that are measure your response when it is known that you are telling the truth, and then they get into the questions. They want to know whether you are telling the truth or not. And if there's any huge amount of change based on those original questions where it is known that you are telling the truth, like they'll ask you things like, is your name Ryan Thorpe? And I'll say yes. And if I was taking a polygraph test, I'd say yes. And then they would mark where I answered that, and that would be like the baseline answer. So anyway, and then they ask you the questions they want to know. And then if it goes, basically the theory is if your responses go crazy and your heart rate goes up and your skin starts sweating a lot and all this, then the theory is that you are lying. Here's the thing: polygraphs are good at measuring the changes that go into um, when you answer questions, but you can't assume that just because someone's internal thing, physiological response has changed, that they are automatically lying. In fact, with my wife being a lawyer, I asked her this a couple of years ago. I remember saying, like, hey, are polygraph tests even used in like court anymore? And she's not a criminal lawyer or anything, but she knows a bunch of criminal lawyers from that she went to law school with and everything. But and she said that very rarely do you see a polygraph used in court anymore because it has been proven over and over again that yes, it can measure the changes that happen, but it's not necessarily great at measuring liars. In fact, in some cases, it's almost 50% wrong. So, anyway, the only reason we include this now in our discussion of emotion is to prove that there is a physiological component to emotion. When you are feeling stressed or scared or sad, you are going to have physiological responses. Your heart rate is going to go up, your breathing rate goes up, your blood pressure might go up, you start sweating more, things like that. They're going to happen. You know this. If you get stressed out, you get scared, all those things happen. We talked about it with autonomic when we talked about fight or flight. Same thing here. It's an emotional response. The idea behind a polygraph test makes sense. Not necessarily the best at actually distinguishing lying, though. Lying is much more detectable in other areas. We don't really get into it, but if you're interested in that, you can Google it to your heart's content. All right. So if you know anyone that doesn't do a very good job of hiding their emotions, in other words, you can usually read what they are thinking emotionally on their face. You know, like facial expressions play a large role in the expression of emotion. When you are sad, it is usually pretty evident outwardly if you are sad, if you are happy, if you're angry, all those things. So, Paul Ekman, who literally this is the only time you're ever going to hear his name in AP psychology, Paul Ekman basically did a bunch of research on the human expression of emotion and how it ties to facial expressions. And he came up with 6 what he called universal emotional expressions: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, and surprise. And basically, what he says is that it doesn't matter what culture you are in, what language you are speaking, what age you are, these are universal expressions. You know, and I'm sure you've had this happen where you may not necessarily understand the conversation that someone is having. Maybe they're speaking a different language. Maybe you accidentally turned on the Spanish language on or whatever on your TV or whatever, and like you may not necessarily be able to understand the conversation, but you can tell what they're thinking emotionally based on their outward expression. And that's what Ekman was saying, is that these 6 things, like again, happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, surprise, these 6 things, according to Paul Ekman, are universal. Everyone expresses them very similarly, and you can recognize them regardless of culture, background, emotion, or language, anything. You can understand the emotion universally. Um, and this makes sense. Again, I know that I've been told by numerous students in the past that I don't express emotion well or whatever. Oh, whatever. But usually, if I am expressing happiness, which according to students in the past is rare, you can recognize it. Okay, you recognize when I'm sad, angry, surprised, whatever. Okay, you can recognize it. Just like you can recognize it on your friends, just like you can recognize it on your parents, your siblings, random stranger down the street, whatever. Okay, you can understand facial expressions, or at least these 6 facial expressions, because they are universal. All right. Okay, the last 3 things that we have to go over in this PowerPoint are theories. Now, all 3 of these theories are very similar, and they all contain basic 2 or 3 of the same parts, regardless of the theory. There are 3. James Longa, excuse me. Apparently, you say that Longa. I pronounced it wrong for years until I was corrected one time by another teacher. Cannon-Bard, and then Singer-Schachter, or sometimes it's just called the 2-factor theory. Anyway, all 3 of these theories are a little bit different in how the body processes emotion, whether or not we interpret it, and then how we experience emotion. Those 3 things happen in all 3 theories: arousal, emotion, and then in some cases interpretation. Or there's an event, arousal, and then emotion. Those 3 things are in every single theory, and then sometimes there is an interpretation. I said that a little bit wrong. I apologize. I'll repeat it. In all 3 theories, there is an event, physiological arousal, and then our experience of emotion. Only in some is there label, interpretation, whatever. And I'll explain this as we go through. So start with the first one. And by the way, I apologize with these. These came straight from the Myers textbook. I just copy and pasted them into my PowerPoints. Whatever. It's not the best example, but I'll try to go through it as best you can. So basically, this first theory, James Longa, says that it's a 3-part sequence in sequential order. One follows the other, or each step follows the other. There is no simultaneous step or anything like that. Basically, it's a 3-part sequence: an event, bodily arousal, and then our processing of emotion, our interpretation of emotion. So basically, what this picture is trying to show in the image is that, let's say we're driving home one night or riding home with somebody, whatever, and a car that is coming towards us starts to weave over the center line, and suddenly we're in a game of chicken that we didn't want to be a part of. So basically, the oncoming car is coming towards us. Then we would, according to this, we would start having a pounding heart or a physiological arousal, and then we would have the emotion of fear. So what this theory says is that it's sequential. First, the event happens, then the physiological arousal in the body, and then we interpret the bodily changes to be an emotion of fear. Okay, pretty straightforward. Okay, and this theory, for the most part, makes a lot of sense. However, you can't really explain how some people could experience the same physiological or the same event and physiological arousal and have different emotions with this. Because basically what this is saying is that whatever happens in the body should mean the same emotion. Doesn't really do a great job of explaining that. It just says every time you have a pounding heart in your chest, you're afraid, is what this is saying. Not the best at explaining that. So this theory is, and by the way, all 3 of these theories that we're going to talk about, I think they could work in any scenario. There's not one that's better than the other. I think it just depends on how you interpret it in that event. But again, so this theory with James Longa, you have to remember it's like dominoes falling. It's sequential: event, arousal, emotion, in that order. The arousal causes the emotion to be felt in the brain, according to this theory. The next theory, and again, I apologize, my ugly face is covering up part of it anyway. So the Cannon-Bard theory says that the same 3 things happen: perception, the event, the perception, the arousal, and the emotion. It's all 3, the same 3 things. However, this theory says that the pounding heart or the physiological arousal and the emotion happen simultaneously. So, in other words, our brain isn't interpreting them, they're happening simultaneously. This would sort of explain how people might have the same physiological arousal and have different emotions. because it's saying that in that scenario, that event, that stimulus, with all the other things that are going on in that situation, would influence the emotion. So when a car is coming towards you, yeah, that's scary. But if someone just jumps out and scares you on Halloween, not as scary because you kind of expect it because of the scenario. Because it happened again, according to this theory, it happens simultaneously, two-part sequence, event, and then simultaneously arousal and emotion. There is no interpretation, there is no labeling. It just happens. All the context is wrapped up in the event itself and the stimulus itself. The arousal and the emotion are linked together according to this theory. Okay. Again, this does an okay job, I think, of explaining how people could have the same experience and different emotions. Still doesn't do a great job. And I feel like this last theory, the Singer-Schachter, or again, sometimes it's just called the two-factor theory, is the best at explaining how we could have similar events, different emotions. So what this theory says is that emotions happen after two things occur before it. This theory says that, again, very first thing that always happens is the event or the arousal, or excuse me, the event or the stimulus. Then it says that simultaneously we have the physiological arousal, but we have a cognitive label in our minds of the situation. We label it as, oh, I'm supposed to be afraid right now. So what this does the best job of explaining how we can have the same stimulus, the same arousal, but because of our labeling of the event and our labeling and understanding of the situation, we could have different emotions. The best example I can say of this is like roller coasters. Some people get on roller coasters and they have the same event. That everybody on the coaster is having the same experience, same physical experience, up, down, around, loop de loop, whatever. Okay. Probably very similar physiological arousals. Heart rate goes up, sweating, all that kind of stuff. But some people are labeling it as, wow, this is really, really fun. And some people are labeling it as, oh my God, I'm going to die or whatever. Okay. So we can have different cognitive labels of the same physiological responses and have different emotions because of it, according to this theory. All right. So the emotion is the result of how the physiological arousal and our cognitive label interact with each other. And that explains the condition of fear or whatever another emotion may be. Okay. Again, I think all three of these theories, you can find some validity to it, and some you can find some scenarios and situations where all three could work perfectly. Again, full disclaimer, this is just a personal opinion. I feel like this last one is the best at explaining the whole, pretty much any situation, but by no means am I saying that this is the only one we should think of or anything like that. That's just a personal opinion. But anyway, so again, all three of these theories, and let me go back a couple slides and show you this. So this image here on the right, it again puts it all in kind of one easy little image here. But so again, let me try. So I'll try to. So again, all three you can see here, all three have an event happening first. That's always the same. Okay. And then with James Longa, it's always a sequential thing. First event, then arousal, the interpretation in our body, and then the emotion. Okay. Cannon-Bard, arousal and emotion happen simultaneously. And then Singer-Schachter, or two-factor, excuse me, the arousal and then the cognitive label is this kind of second stage, and then the experience of emotion. Okay. So you just have to know the order. You have to know how that relates back to the actual theory itself, and you should be good to go. All right, that's it for the first one. Again, these both of these PowerPoints for emotion are pretty short, so I'll be back with the second part here soon, and I'll see you guys then.